Thank you very much. Thank you all. Welcome. Welcome everyone to Multimodality Talks. This is a very special event, as probably for the first time in this series of Multimodality Talks. We're reaching out, we're breaking the boundaries of Europe and Central Europe time zones, and we connect with other parts of the world in an interesting attempt to get our worlds to converse. And we couldn't have a better person for this than Professor Judith Green. Welcome, Judith. It's such an honor to have you. You're all familiar with Judith's work. Very few things to say. She's a distinguished professor emerita from the University of California, Santa Barbara, an established scholar in the field of education, who's been teaching more than 5 decades and will have a lot to say from her experience of research across a number of projects within the domain of interactional ethnography, teacher relations, learner-teachers relations, with an overall interest in the social construction of knowledge. And she's written extensively, books, articles, and in the chat, you'll see that we've uploaded links to Judith's work. And one of the fascinating things about her work, and an interesting example for all of us to follow, is making as many of her resources available through online discussions, conversations, recordings. So there's a very interesting set of resources you'll find in the websites I've uploaded in the chat. Judith's work is particularly focused on developing ways of exploring social, cultural, communicative, academic processes. And one of the questions that guides her approach is, how do theories guiding our research can shape our questions, our epistemologies, and the processes that actually inform our research? And today is an interesting opportunity as we ask Judith to present her work, all her long trajectory in the field of education, and through all the developments, especially in America, which have been running parallel to developments in Europe, Australia, and other parts of the world, where we've been dealing with multimodality, critical discourse analysis. And it's one of the rare opportunities to get our worlds to converse. And we asked Judy also to reflect on her parallel trajectory to those of several of us who've been working in the field of multimodal social semiotics, multimodal discourse analysis, etc. Judith, welcome to our session. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited, and thank you. I've learned a lot in working with you, and I look forward to learn more from everybody who have joined us.
Thank you. In this new format, which was necessary due to the time difference, we didn't really want to inconvenience Judy with giving a talk at 5 or 6 in the morning. We pre-recorded the session with Judith. Judith will be here to follow the talk and receive questions and have a live discussions at the end. So we're going to share our screen. Jiawei is going to share her screen and project the pre-recorded video so you can all watch together. However, for any reason you have a challenge with the connection, in the chat, we have put the Zoom link to this pre-recording. It's roughly 55 minutes. So if we get to miss any of you, you can always come back here in 55 minutes to join the live discussion. And the invitation for all of you is to identify the relevance of this work and how it informs the shaping of your research and the way you position yourself as researchers. So it's about your epistemological, ontological positioning in all kinds of research within multimodality and beyond. Thank you. And Jiawei, thank you ever so much for making this meeting possible today.
Thank you. So I will now try to share from my screen.
Thank you. In the meantime, yes, and during the session, please feel free to upload questions in the chat. So that's an interesting way to make a pre-recorded lecture live. So we're happy to chat, and Judith may be able to respond, or other associates of Judith can do the same thing.
Yes, and
Okay.
please do us a favor to turn off your audio as that will switch between screens. So it would be good if we all turn off our
We'll all turn it
audios.
off. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
So I'm
Jamie.
gonna share it now.
We will explore what I mean. Very much for the. Thank you for the kind introduction, and I'm hoping that today we will explore what I mean by the map is not the territory. That will let us continue to have a dialogue after this session about how interactional ethnography and multimodality research can come together to create a deeper focus on particular questions of interest to different researchers. So, interactional ethnography has grown up over the past 6 decades. It became formally labeled in 2000 when my doctoral students wanted to know, what do we call this? So rather than just microethnographic research and video-enabled research, we named this particular framework interactional ethnography. And it was designed to address originally questions in classrooms, which are bounded entities. And so I'm going to give you some principles from work in linguistic and social anthropology that guide the work and how we enter, how we think about it, because this is not entering an everyday context. This is entering an institutionally defined space. But how do we think about it? How do we understand it? And how do we learn what we need to know to be in that space as a member might? So that's our goals. It grew up within the fields of literacies and languages so that we could begin to identify elements of everyday life in those spaces. But it requires us to do the following, which come out of the work of Michael Agar on language shock. And he came to a seminar with us to help rethink his theories in the educational sphere, as well as what he had done across years. So in 2006, there is an article, if you're interested, I can share it later, that he did with us and at the meeting. So in this case, it also builds on Shirley Bryce Heath and Brian Street's work. And they did a book called On Ethnography, which is a dialogue between them, Brian as a social anthropologist from the UK, and Shirley Bryce Heath as a linguistic anthropologist whose work is grounded in the US primarily. And then they had a dialogue in which they watched a novice ethnographer learn to do ethnography on the streets of Rhode Island as she watched a juggler work. So she could figure out what it meant to be a juggler, what would she need to know. But it takes the dialogue with her, with the juggler, and with each other from different perspectives. So that's where these principles come from. The goal is that you suspend your known categories, which means you step back from ethnocentrism, what you think you know. And then you want to do it because you want to construct new ways of knowing. Anthropologists enter to theorize people's life worlds, cultures in the making, not culture as an existing phenomenon, but what the cultural processes, practices, languages, and other things are. So you have to begin by acknowledging the difference between what you as an ethnographer know and what the actors know. So when you enter, you're doing that because your goal is to represent what is known by the local actors and what is learned by the ethnographer through an epistemological process. In our work, we call it ethnographer as learner in the context. So here is a core piece, theoretical piece from the work of Mitchell from a book by R.F. Ellen on ethnographic research. And it was done in 1984 in the re-envisioning of some of the anthropological frameworks within the UK in social anthropology. It was introduced to us by Brian Street, who has been very instrumental in work on culture as a verb and on the social construction of literacies in and across everyday life worlds. So, anthropological case studies are detailed presentations of ethnographic data relating to some sequence of events from which the analyst seeks to make some theoretical inference. It's not a description, it's an analytic process, and you're doing it to create theory in action, as action, and for actions, or to represent those, not represent them. The events themselves may relate to any level of social organization. A whole society, that's often what people think ethnography is. Some sections of a community, like a family or peer group or community center or museum, or an individual. But it's some sequence of events that we're looking at from which you seek to make theoretical inferences. And then what distinguishes telling case studies from more general ethnographic reportage is the detail and particularity of the account. So we're going to show you how we think about detailed accounts of particular moments, over time moments, other processes. And each case study, therefore, here's the base. It's a description of a specific configuration of events in which some distinctive set of actors have been involved in some defined situation at some particular point in time. And I will try and unfold that through two case studies, through two telling cases. But before I do that, I want to show you how I see and how I found the intersection between multimodalities roots and the formal framing of interactional ethnography. So in 2000, Claire Wyatt Smith and Joyce Cummings had a big grant in Australia to study different schools and different dynamics and to bring different researchers together to look at how their theories would help understand literacy and the development of literacies. And they sent my group 5 classes of one student in a vocational and further education program in Australia. That's grades 11 and 12. Okay, because at 11 and 12, they either go into a university-oriented or a vocational-oriented track. They sent us 5 classes, a math, an English, a hospitality class, a cooking class, and one we had to bring somebody in from outside to help us with, a industry studies class, because we didn't understand what we were seeing. So I brought my brother in, who is a master craftsman in sheet metal, to help us understand how to read and interpret what was going on. Now, Gunter Kress, in the same volume of Linguistics and Ed in 2000, which is volume 4, said the goal of multimodality was learning how to see, and in the case of literacies, curriculum subjects, young people, and school engagement with the world, schooled engagement with the world. The concept of schooled literacy can be traced back to 1986 to Jenny Cook Gumpers in her book on literacy and schooling, with where she brought John Gumpers and others together. So schooled literacy was moving from everyday literacy, which is what Brian studies, what Jenny studies, what Judith Coleman in Mexico studies, and different people engage in, to then inside the institutional context of schooling. So schooled literacy is a type of literacy, not the full scope of literacies, plural. And we have a group now called It's a research network in applied linguistics on literacies across languages and social domains. And that's kind of a history. But how do we learn to see? So there is a book that I was asked to review in 79, and it's been re-released in 2016 by James Spradley. And he's an anthropologist who passed too soon. But his ideas came into giving me a way of understanding how to look at a world. Because he said, what you're trying to do is look at a social situation, provide a point of entry and framework for the observations and patterns of your everyday life, not mine, that I was entering. A pattern is a statement of the relationship among features within and across context. So we're not just giving a description and saying that's a pattern. It's a relationship between elements. Patterns can be identified by asking questions such as, can you describe in detail all of the places? This will become important. All of the objects, the material resources and other things that people orient to. If you're in a museum, what are the objects? They're different than in the classroom, although the pattern might be similar. That there are things on the wall, there are things in the talk, there are things that you're looking at and you're working with. All of those are different kinds of objects. What are the acts? And he doesn't talk about it as behaviors. He talks about acts because acts are intentional. So you're looking at the intention of what the people are communicating, the kinds of activities being constructed, and the events that are related to those activities within particular time periods. So you're asking, what are all the time periods for what kind of an event? Who are the actors? What are the goals of this? And he says you can look at feelings and emotion, which is a topic coming up today over and over again. But you would ask, where are the objects, persons, events, activities located? So you're situating these not as individual things, but as relationships. Objects are in a situation. What are all the ways activities incorporate objects, people, acts, and activities? Do you see how you can create a language for analysis? And you can do, what are the ways space, objects, acts, events, time are used by actors? And so you can look at his book on participant observation and you'll begin to see this as a piece of the puzzle. So questions guiding an IE researcher then, when we enter to step back from the known, is who, does, says, engages in what, with, to, or for whom, in what, under what conditions, for what purposes, when and where, with what outcomes, and with what consequences for current and future actions. Because in schooled learning, as well as everyday learning, it isn't in the moment you learn everything, but it orients you to thinking about things, and then you can trace when and how you know or become aware of your learning, or you can show learning. So, IE is a logic of inquiry. And what are the guiding theories? How do we understand it? Some of these spaces I've talked about. Interactional ethnography is a theoretically driven approach. It's transdisciplinary to the study of classrooms as cultures in the making, not as a given culture. So every time I go from one class we learned to another, there's a whole nother way of being a student, interacting, observing. So in central to this approach, to our approach then, is a definition by Michael Agar of language and culture. And they cannot be separated because they constitute what he calls lingua culture. And I'll explain that a little bit more. Building on this perspective, we understand culture as a conceptual system whose surface appears in words of people's language and actions across times and events. So if I want to understand the culture of Sophia's classes, how would I do that? I would have to step back. I'd have to see what she's asking me to do. I'd have to look at the word she's using. I'd have to look and understand this. If I were going to be in another world, I would have to do the same thing. So languaculture happens, he says, when the ethnographer wonders about what is happening. Whoa, wait a minute. Languaculture is not just a mere description of what you're hearing and seeing. It also happens when you wonder what's going on. Okay, so I wondered in Brazil when I was on a Fulbright why the woman went in the shoe store when I wanted to thank her and said this. Oh, in Brazil, this is an obscene gesture. In the US, this is okay. It's good. It's thank you. This is thank you in Portuguese, in Brazilian Portuguese, in the culture. So how even the gestures, the words and things make me aware of what I need to know. So Agar argues that lingua in languaculture is about discourse, not just words and sentences. And culture in languaculture is above meanings that include, but go beyond, well beyond what the dictionary and grammar offer. So you're not going to be able to go to a dictionary and find a definition of a word you see or hear or experience. So ways of seeing are conceptually defined events, theoretically defined. Events are not simply given in the physical setting. A kitchen, a living room, a sidewalk in front of a drugstore, nor in combination of persons. Okay? Rather, contexts are constituted by what people are doing and where and when they are doing it. And McDermott frames this succinctly as people and interaction become environments for each other. So in multimodality, do you look at how the people are reading each other in order to participate, to coordinate, to orient, and what they're being oriented to? Okay, so ultimately, social context, he says, consists of mutually shared and ratified definitions of situation. And in the social actions persons take on the basis of these definitions. Whoa, wait a minute. On the first day of school, does a kindergarten student know what to expect? Or is that something that develops in and through and across time, events, and cycles of activity? In and through the discourse, what's being made present to them about what are those norms and expectations? Okay, what about if you go to junior high and every class you take, it's a different topic, right? Is it coordinated the same way? Can you predict what's going to happen next? Those are the kinds of questions we're interested in. This comes into languaculture by Agar's notion is he sees LC1 and LC2. So he equates the ethnographer from an anthropological frame as like a second language learner, as like somebody coming from one country to another country and learning the language, but you don't learn the language. You learn the language in context of use. So that's the basis for creating rich points, because you're going to find places you don't know. Ethnographers bring your own languaculture, which he's labeled as languaculture 1. It's through your eyes that you're interpreting what you're seeing, you're recording, you're jotting down. But the funny thing happened with Doug Baker in a studio art class. It was an intergenerational one. One of the fourth year students in the class came up to him and said, "You look bored. What are you writing down? You don't know what you need to participate in this, or you need to look at this." So even how you are seen in a setting is part of that clash between languacultures, the ethnographers and the peoples. But she told him what to look at and how to do it. She became an informal cultural guide to what he needed to understand in order to be part of it. So languaculture 2, for Agar, from the researcher point of view, is the people's languaculture. For me, languaculture 1 is what I'm trying to understand. And languaculture too is what I bring. But there's always going to be sudden instances when I wonder what's happening, or have to step back to understand how others are engaging in a common task that I don't know how to do, or what occurs as a rich point. A point where you begin to wonder, whoa, what's happening here? Oh, wait a minute, what do I need to know? What do I need to trace? How did this come into being? Where is it going? So these are the kinds of questions that we try to capture, but we use also the interactional sociolinguistics. I was John Gumper's student at Berkeley, and he would say things like, no, don't tell me what you hear. Tell me what tell me what you hear, because he was looking at how the communication process occurs and what is available to be heard in what ways, but not just that. So he's looking at the local patterns of language and use in and for actions within and across groups, what lead to a situated set of communicative demands and communicative repertoires. The BBC did a special program on his work back in the 80s, I think it is, called Multiracial Britain. When the Indian person went into a bank, he said, I want to deposit some money, please. And what happened was the guy behind the banker says, well, where's your account? The response was a frame clash. He says, my account's in Wembley. Well, why didn't you say so? Then a Brit comes in. He says, I want to deposit some money, please. Oh, where's your account? My account's in Wembley. Oh, you need a gyro form. So the intonational contours, the patterns, the speech, all shaped what got heard. And then the interview of the person, John took that and showed how, and made it an analogy to somebody who likes Brahms and Beethoven learning atonal music for the first time. And he showed the words and the stress patterns and how they created the frame clash and the response. So the people are interacting and responding to people through not only the words being said, but the ways in which they're doing it. The ways members construct and display social and academic identities and actions through their choice of ways of communicating and participating, not just talking. Okay? And so interactional sociolinguistics provides a base for my perspective on discourse analysis, which intersects with conversation analysis but differs. Because I'm concerned about the text being built, not just the discursive work. The ways of making visible the individual within the collective as well as the collective, and how they contribute to or not, how what's said and communicated is interpreted or not, I should have added, understood or not, participated in or not. This is the developing event. And how they learn through those interactions or fail to from a communicative work of the group at particular points in time, as well as over time. So interactional sociolinguistics, and Michael Agar also worked with Gumper's in his early career, conceptualizes members as well as ethnographers as bringing LC1, linguistic, cultural, and social presuppositions, okay, to any situation. So what does interactional sociolinguistics orient a researcher to as they seek to transcribe discourse and interpret what is being interactionally accomplished? Gumper said, it's a hearer's perspective or actor's perspective, focusing on ways in which people use contextualization cues to communicate meaning and intention. And if you're interested in his talk, there is on the web an interview of him in his about his whole process and how he rethought it. But you're looking at pitch, stress. Okay. What or gas. How do you say these? It tells me who you are, where you're from, or like in spelling, if I'm giving a sentence, the teacher we saw, and I used to use this to teach spelling, a boy from New Jersey went down south, the southern part. So the teacher said, how many vowels do you hear? Listen carefully. Come. Y'all come. Well, that's not how they talk in New Jersey. They say, come. Okay, so he says 3, come. He hears the elision, he hears, okay. So she says, no. He says 2. She said, no, think again. So he's hearing he's not right. He has guessed wrong. And he says 1. She says, good. But y'all come is not what we say in California. It is not what you say in New Jersey. These are all states, and if you go across the country, you will get different intonations, different ways of talking that have a consequence for what you can understand. So these are some of the different dimensions, but also the kinesics, proxemics, the distance between people. Different cultures have different positionings. Can you get close to somebody? Can you not get close to somebody? What are your gestures? What are your movements? What's your eye gaze? What are you looking at? I'm looking out my window now and I get to see it sunny. Okay, lexical choices and grammatical choices are in there, but they're not the primary and only source. All of these contextualization cues are based on how we identify units of analysis too. So why ethnography of communication? Gumpers and Hymes in 1972 brought together people within the linguistic fields to do directions in sociolinguistics, which was the founding or formalization of ethnography of communication. It's a book you might want to look at to see the history. But Hymes argues later that the linguistic aspects of ethnography can inform both the study of social life and the study of language. If, and we do an if-then logic. So you have to think about, if you take this theory, what does it help you see? If one begins with social life, he says, then the linguistic aspect of ethnography require one to ask, what are the communicative means, verbal and other, by which this bit of social life is conducted and interpreted? What mode of organization? Here's the first phase of mode, right? Modal. What mode of organization from the standpoint of verbal repertoires or codes? And can one speak of appropriate or inappropriate, better or worse uses of these means? And how are the skills for doing that entailed by the means acquired, and to whom are they accessible? My research and a lot of the interactional ethnography in education and microethnographic and video-enabled ethnographies are about who has access to educational problems and processes. Not unlike Gunter's question of the curriculum and other pieces. So who has access is really one of the keys, because in the 1950s, the psychologists here in the US and in other places said, children came to school with no language, meaning they didn't have school language, standard English. Is there such an animal? We have now debated that for years. What makes something standard? Okay, so ethnographers, psychologists, sociologists, and anthropologists came together to deconstruct the deficit models and to reconstruct that language was a resource and everyone enters with the system and has a way of understanding it, okay? So theoretical perspectives. How and in what ways do IE researchers see, record, analyze, theorize what is being socially, linguistically, and academically accomplished in and by and across events, cycles of activity, by particular configurations of actors for particular purposes? In 1977, when I went to England as a teacher, I went into one of the bookstores from the major universities, and I found Douglas Barnes's work. At that time, it was called The Language of Learner in the School. That was 1969. 1977, he put a book together called From Communication to Curriculum. And that was then redone in 1992 as new theories of Jerome Bruner and others were created. He reanalyzed his original records from his archive, which is something that an ethnographic archive permits you to do. So I need to visualize. How do you visualize the processes? So here's the tip of the iceberg. To me, the tip of the iceberg is what is known. There's whole lots of things underneath that I can't see and I need to do, and I bring different languages to. So this is the currents of knowledge. And in order to go beneath it, I need to get into the actional sociolinguistic submarine and look at the questions, theory, relationships, and what's possible to know. Oh, but then I also need to go to the ethnomethodology submarine because James Heap has helped me understand what counts as literacy or knowing is part of the ethnomethodological question. So that brought different theories. And then down here, I get into the sociocultural, which is the Vygotskian and the social theories and the cognitive. And then down to the discourse theories. And then my question is for us, what are the multimodality frameworks bringing to this study? How do I know? How can I learn it? Here's another way of looking at it. These are books that I've brought together with colleagues and journals. Here's the one that Gunter Kress is in and we're in, to bring different theories together to help you understand what might be on this journey and how to define learning within a culturally framed thing. So I'm going to go really quickly through this, and I'm going to take a little bit more time to show you telling cases. And that is, where do we begin? So we begin by mapping. And that means mapping of what? So we draw on David Bloom's argument and in Bloom, Carter, Christian, Otto, and Schuer Ferris, which focuses in on microethnographic and video-enabled work, to what is being proposed, recognized, acknowledged, and interactionally accomplished that is discursively and academically significant for members to do. We're also looking at what the boundaries and the phases of activity are, what the relationship between language and activity across time in this event, and who has access to it, and what are the consequences. So we have to look at who proposes and formulates or reformulates the developing event, how they're constructed, and if talk and action constitute texts being constructed then, or composed, then according to Norman Fairclough's work, each text, each utterance is a text, a social process, and a discourse practice, a way of knowing, being, and doing, and make something happen. It's not just, but it also has elements of other texts, past texts, future texts, other kinds of things, and the signs and symbols of spoken and written language, visual language, what it orients them to, what to do, when to do it, how, and what previous ways. So, okay, let's go into the first day of a bilingual class. Stop for a second. Clear your mind and become 10 years old. Okay? What are you going to be doing as you enter this space for the first time? You may have had brothers and sisters who told you what will happen, but what is actually happening? So here we've mapped the time flow. 45 seconds from 8:10 to 8:55 is a period, 45 minutes, that shows what we call entering the tower. How did the teacher, design the entry phase for you? Look at this, the language that she used. And the Spanish comes first because she spoke to the children first in Spanish and then English, because there were bilingual students, there were monolingual Spanish speakers, and there were monolingual English speakers. But there were less monolingual English speakers than there were bilingual and monolingual Spanish speakers. So entering the tower required meeting the teacher, greeting students and parents. That's what the S&P stand for, responding to the teacher. Basically, English is a subject-verb object language, so we always use present continuous verbs plus objects, not codes that nominalize the word. So we don't reduce it to a noun, but we give it to the process. Choosing where to sit. Oh, I get to orienting the students to their name cards, choosing a place to sit, choosing where to sit, decorating your name square. Look at all the actions that I took, and whether I talked to someone, that's a different question. But this is the teacher's goals. How she's structuring, in Giddens' sense, the flow of conduct. Okay, then at 8:55, she goes, dun, 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 dun. So that's the chime that she plays when she wants the class's attention. But what we found in looking at that, 10 minutes before, she signaled to the children verbally that in 10 minutes we're going to change. At the moment of the change, students already, if they heard it, knew that something was coming. So it wasn't just automatically, close your books, do this. It was ringing it and welcoming them, celebrating the languages of the tower as English and Spanish. You're getting the explaining ways of using Spanish and English in the classroom, introducing the adult members to students, introducing ethnography, talking about basic routines of drinking water and everything and exploring, and then introducing the tower as community with traditions, and they will be building those traditions too, presenting physical spaces of the tower. This is in welcoming to the community, the tower as a community. These are all the analytic interpretations of those actions that we were making. It's opportunities for exploring self, others, and physical environments as text, seeing and reading what other participants are doing, reestablishing contact with friends, meeting. So these are the actions we saw being taken, but this is her actions of resituate self within a large group, getting support from adults and classmates. So these are the kinds of actions possible in this environment. So from text to situating events in times and cycles. Here's a later event on that day. To understand it, because they went from whole class to then individual at table groups, and there were 6 tables around the room, to inside the table group, to the table group then reporting to the whole class. Well, what were they reporting? Each table group got a watermelon. It was a way of introducing mathematics. And they had to estimate the weight of the watermelon, and they had to estimate the cost of it. And eventually the teacher gave them the weight from the market and the cost so she could contextualize a math concept in everyday world. They then presented it to the group and choosing English or Spanish. So they had to have an English interpreter and a Spanish interpreter. So both language was always present. Okay, today we might call it translanguaging opportunities, but then this is back in the 1990s, and that translanguaging wasn't a norm for us to understand. But then it looked at how the individual constructed it within, how they then shared their estimate, how the group presented it. So we're tracing the individual collective development, and then they went back to their table groups in their notebook and recorded their actions. So it wasn't just doing, it was also stepping back and then recording, reconstructing what you did, what you know, and how you learned about your estimate. So you could record your thinking because her goal was the thinking. Okay, so we did contrastive analysis. across times. And I'm going to show you the contrast. This is pre-post English only, 1998. Up until this point, bilingual education had been legitimate. And she could use both languages. 1998, there were federal legislation, court cases. They changed the standards outside of the classroom, beyond the classroom door. The state and local elections influenced what could be taught. The tests framed it, and the class size reduction going from 35 people to 28 people or whatever the size was. So now you have Jose, and the teacher walks in that day and said, I used to be a bilingual teacher. And she helps the students understand the transformation because the district took away all the bilingual materials. They took away, the parents, when they got to the playground, because of the rhetoric in the community, stopped speaking Spanish and only spoke English to their children. And every homework, every document wasn't in English and Spanish, but I'll show you what happens. We did a 10-year study in her class with her, not in her class, so on her. And these are all the actions like we saw on the first day. These are what occurred every year on the first day. But look at 1998. Three things changed. Choice of language to speak in, choice of language to write in, and writing to think, recording your thinking in your log. Writing never came back. Speaking did because of federal legislation in our Supreme Court case. You have to give time for the monolingual Spanish speakers to learn English. Okay. And writing to think in that way never came back. So contrastive analysis can show the effect over time, because Bakhtin's argument is any utterance is a link in a very complexly organized chain of utterances. And here's what we think captures schooling or any learning. Sooner or later, what is heard and actively understood will find its response in the subsequent speech or behavior of the listener. In most cases, genres of complex cultural communication are intended precisely for this kind of actively responsive understanding with delayed action. I don't expect to see it in the moment necessarily. Although a lot of research and education says, yes, it happened, no, it didn't. No, we have to trace it over time, because he says everything that he said here also pertains to written and read speech with appropriate adjustments and additions. So I'm going to ask Jiawei to be Arturo, and here's a student who became an ethnographer because of the teacher's actions. And here he's going to write at the end of the year what you need to know next year if you come into this class. Jiawei?
So I'll be Arturo now. In our Tower community, we have our own language as well as the languages we bring from outside, like Spanish and English, which helped us make our own language. So, for example, someone that is not from our classroom community would not understand what insider, outsider think twice, note-taking, note-making, literature log, and learning log mean. If Ms. Jäger says we're going to make a sandwich, the people from another class or room would think that we were going to make a sandwich to eat. Of course we aren't, but that is part of our common language.
In our conversations, Jiawei said, well, what is a sandwich? And it's really from writing. It's how you compose a text with a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's the sandwich.
Yeah.
So go on. Whoops.
And to be an insider, which means a person from the class, you also need to know our Bill of Rights and Responsibilities, which was made by the members of the Tower community. And if Ms. Jäger said, leave your HRL on your desk, people would not understand unless someone from the Tower community told him or her that. Even if we were told him or her that HRL stands for Home Reading Log, they still would not understand what it is and what you write in it. If we told a new student it's time for SSL and ESL, he would not understand. These words are all part of the Common Tower community language, and if someone new were to come in, we would have explained how we got them and what they mean. We also would tell them that we got this language by reports, information, investigations, and what we do and learn in our Tower community.
So Arturo is orienting us as ethnographers to the kinds of things we need to understand and how we need to conceptualize it. Beth Yeager used to have the students every year do these essays for parents as well as for the students coming in. And the students would decide on how they could show you where to look, that they could learn X or Y, or be a creative writer or understand history. So it is a way that Ethnographic Eyes became part of her instructional process, her engaging students in learning. So if we take that, then what Arturo captures is a culture in the making. The class is viewed as a cultural group that shapes what counts as knowing, being, doing, saying within and across times, events, and actors. Shirley Bryce Heath in Anthropology frames this, and also James Heath from an ethnomethodology point of view. A class constructs a language of the class, a discursive and referential system, and a set of cultural practices that shape what counts as being literate, membership, and language in use, texts, identities, among other social constructions and formulations. So identities here is a wordle that shows you a range of things I've just talked about. We have identities being constructed by the teacher, for the teacher, by students, for the teacher, by each other. You've got communities, you've got practices, they're formulated, they're interactional, they're constructed, they're explored, they're collective, they're individual, they're personal consequences as well as collective. So I'm going to take longer than they think to do this, about 10 minutes more. And I'm going to take you quickly through the premises guiding map making, because map are, from a theory of map making, each map is a bit of an angle on a terrain in a particular way of capturing it. So mapping is a conceptually grounded analytic process. And as such, it's both a presentation and a representation of reality, but it is not reality itself, since reality is in the mind of the person, not in the physical space. And it's always changing. So Giddens, we draw on the notion of structuration. We view events as constructed through the flow of conduct among participants. Events are chains of activity named by members. So you need to understand the local language, the local terminology. Okay? So within an interactional ethnographic perspective, we assume that events are cultural phenomena that are socially accomplished through the moment-by-moment interactions among members, as well as across time and events. And it becomes an emic or insider perspective. That's what we're seeking, not just mere description. And they can also be viewed as through analytic induction. And it's not deduction or, so you don't go from the whole to the parts, or induction from solely the parts to the whole. It's an analytic induction where you're trying to understand the wholes, WHOLES, as well as the HOLES, the wholes that you can't see. That involve retrospective analysis and naming by the analyst more etic descriptions, outsider descriptions, even when seeking insider interpretation. So that's the tension. And here is a diagram of that logic. You begin by posing an overarching question that framing the telling case study. Here in this particular one in the bilingual classroom, is how opportunities for learning are constructed in classroom, how different participants contribute to the process of construction, and in which way they can this process of construction be represented. That leads to a smaller bit, which is analyzing the onset of community, which I just showed you. And you pose it, what was being accomplished through the construction. You build a data set to do it, and you build ways of representing the analysis. And then you review the transcripts and event maps for identifying roles and relations as rights and obligations. Next level of analysis may shift completely to looking at the production of event maps and other events. You can then also look at individuals within them, but you're also going to go through that process of building a data set from your archive records or gathering new insights. So here, watch. How is what is being interactionally accomplished? How are ways of thinking, knowing as a dentist, and we're going into a new site? What do you start with? How do you transcribe? What transcripts inform the construction of your maps? And therefore, mapping and transcribing are interactive, abductive, not inductive or deductive only, recursive and nonlinear processes of constructing data to construct warranted accounts. Here's the dentistry class. This is a timeline. For everything we do, we locate any particular analysis within a time frame of the group. Since school activity is bounded in time, this is easy to do if you're there daily or look at the lesson plans or find out what you missed. So here we have a third-year undergraduate dentistry problem-based learning context in Hong Kong. You have integrated semester 1, you have integrated semester 2. Oh, well, so the study starts in semester 2, but I can reconstruct certain parts of the problem that led to the moment that I'm looking at. I can do it through analysis of the plans. I can do it through interviews with the teacher. I can look at the documents and the materials that were there. I have found over the years that I've worked with educators and others in the site, including Susan, is that they already have the record stores somewhere so you can reconstruct them. Teachers don't tend to throw away their lesson plans. They tend to build on them, revise them, and do others. So this one was in a multimodal learning within and across problem-based cycle study. There were 3 different interconnected, intertextually tied events. Tutorial 1, self-directed learning, and tutorial 2, which made a cycle of activity. Problem exploration was on step 1. Online activity, oh, there's a whole digital world they created outside of the tutorial space that students were then sent to, so I have to trace them as they go across. And then problem understanding here. Then I can bring that moment into the tutorial. So this is the event map of the developing modalities, discussions, different configurations, and the what was being proposed to them. Refer to see a dentist. These are facts given to them about the client because they have to learn to diagnose the patient. So here's the second one. Online, they went to the Library of Dental Information that the university created. They had discussions among themselves in e-library, discussion on Science Direct, discussion. So there was a whole support system, not visual, in the physical space, but in a separate physical space. And then you have the modalities, visualizing whiteboard drawings. They had to frame them, they had to present them not only in words, but in visualizations so that you could see what was there. You had different radiographs, which were the technical printouts of the, machines that take your x-rays and do other things. So that could be done. And here's how those were then linked to looking at the person's mouth and deciding on something. So the level dependent. But then you can zoom in and going to the tutorial and the first session of it, that's where this one ties to. Here's what the facilitator said. Mr. Chan is referred to see a dentist. Did anyone have anything to add? Otherwise, let's move on to the material. So he's inviting it, but nothing happened. Maybe we can discuss it one by one. Okay, so he, like Beth in her class, like Ms. Yeager, is orienting the students to how to do the work. So here's Ethnographic Eyes. And this is, I'm going to ask Chris Matmus, who's my colleague, to read this. And this is from an administrator who wasn't in our study, but who watched the teachers and the students and began to understand ethnography. Okay?
Thank you, Judith. As my understanding of ethnography grows, my perspective on classrooms as cultures continues to evolve. This evolution has forced me to reflect upon my observational style as a school administrator and has challenged me to implement a shift in focus when visiting classrooms at the school site. Viewing classrooms through an ethnographic lens has helped me shift from traditional observation, where the teacher is the primary focus, as she or he implements the key components of a standard lesson plan with occasional notes on classroom management style and classroom environment, to focusing on the actions of students in the classroom. Now I watch and listen to students much more than before, looking and listening for evidence of previously learned skills, emerging skills, and where the community of learner is headed. I also look for evidence of connections between these skills. These connections are sometimes made by the students as they learn together, or discovered or created by the community as a whole because of the way the lesson was designed.
So in doing that, I just want to go back to, this is what he was telling us he did. He had to suspend his known categories, shift. He constructed new ways of engaging with the problem he wanted to see. And he acknowledged the difference between the past way he was seeing and what was now his process to understand what was happening and how students were learning, because students were the center of his goal, not the curriculum as the center. And he wanted then he wrote this, by the way, for a special issue of a journal called Primary Voices for the National Council of Teachers of English, where the teachers each wrote about how they engaged in this type of research in their own classrooms to address a reflexive process, to learn from it. Like how when children are pulled out of your program, what do they miss? The teacher created that, looked at how much time was lost by the child and how much time was lost by the group, and got the school to let her bring the specialist in to work with the child in situ. So this can solve everyday kinds of problems. And so these are the different areas that interactional ethnography has been adopted, engaged in, to study: literacy, language, science and engineering, mathematics, social science, physical education, law, medicine, musicology, architecture, arts, business, no distance education, which is a digital world between 3 countries in the same class at the same time, transforming curriculum, all of these different kinds of maker spaces, intern recruitments. These are all the different areas over the last 4 decades that this type of approach to ethnographic work has developed and has been able to do. So I wanted to share with you some questions that I have possible for continuing a discussion with anyone interested, because I'm really interested in how you view the possibility that interactional ethnography could help research within the community or your own research, or how interactional ethnography can be of interest to multimodality researchers. I'd really like to talk about that. Since I technically retired from the university, I now play with people in different countries to continue the dialogue, to explore further. My friend Chris Matmos and I do this because she teaches research methods, but she also has a background in participatory evaluation. So how do we think about that? How can we inform it? And what questions do I have that I can address today in the discussion that's going to happen now? Thank you very much. I know I talk fast, but I hope you can come back and revisit the I can be on a blog if you want, or you can ask me and we can Zoom and have a discussion. I'm really open to any way I can share ideas and pay forward what others have contributed to me toward the work of understanding worlds of other people as well as education.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you all so much for contributing to this pre-recorded lecture. Thank you, Judith. I think there's quite a lot of food for thought, especially as we can all reflect within the multimodality community about the relevance of this invitation to rethink our inquiry, the process of inquiry, expose the tenets, all the assumptions, the epistemological assumptions of our work. And I particularly like your visualization with the iceberg, which are the things we know and all the things that we don't know, but we have to kind of get on board a number of vehicles, a number of ways of knowing, which are the different epistemologies as well. Jawai, thank you for this. Jawai and Chris, thank you for interacting with Judith. But can we invite questions from the audience? You can raise your hand, please, and or you can write in the chat. I guess I have a few interactional ethnographers within us, or maybe if we don't, it might be interesting to think whether these epistemological assumptions, interactional ethnography as an epistemological logic of inquiry, is relevant to all of us for doing any kind of multimodal research, even if we're not dealing with people necessarily, or just looking at data, let's say texts, textbooks, educational textbooks, or even if our research does not involve human participants. I'm just wondering whether our deductive approaches should not only be deductive, like transposing theory into data, whether it should be engaging in this abductive logic, like understanding that our interpretation of modes, the way we understand them, and the way we're trying to unweave in multimodal text has something to do with the way we are immersed into that social world and make assumptions about how others are immersed into the social world. Was this a hang, Jacobo, or not? It's fine. Just give people
Yeah,
a
I
couple of
think
minutes
people
to
are
write
still,
and think. Thank you, Jawai.
sorry, I think people are still kind of thinking about it because it is actually really a work of several decades. And I just would like to thank Professor Green for giving such an inspiring talk. And as Sophie suggested, I really appreciate the visuals, materials, examples, and transcripts, and the cases you shared, as it helped me personally to understand interactional ethnography as an epistemological logic of inquiry. Yeah, there's so much to read again and go back to the slides as you suggested and think further. So I think if I may ask a question, I kind of get the impression that you really worked across disciplines, and interdisciplinarity is quite a huge word in your work. And so how do you see the relationships between different theoretical backgrounds that you get informed within the interactional ethnography, and how you might deal with sometimes the differences among them in actual work. So that is my question. I hope I make myself clear.
No, your question is perfect. Susan Bridges, who's my colleague in Hong Kong, that I shared the work from the dental and medical education. She assembles teams every time so that the dentists, the facilitators, and the researchers are bringing their perspectives together on what is being observed, what's happening on the video, what's doing it. So you get the different triangulation of perspectives. It isn't which one's right. It's what do you learn from each perspective? Because back to the 1984 book, the chapter is called Producing Data. We produce the data, and each of us has a perspective and a logic that we're bringing to it. So a medical doctor may have a different way of looking at it than I do as somebody from interactional sociolinguistics. Multimodality is the common core in the center of what we're doing because we're seeing the visualization or the record. But Gregory Bateson, back in the 1950s in a book called About Bateson, it's a festschrift to him, Birdwhistle argued that 25 years before 1977, in anthropology, there had been a separation of theory from method. I have this feeling that theory from method is a disconnect even today, because I was taught in statistics, and I do have a stat background, to look at the theories of statistics and how it matched the theories I was bringing, so I knew which things to choose. So how do the theories of the methodology you're using influence what's going on? But what he also argued, and it's been argued by Geertz and others in anthropology, is that what you have when you leave the field is a record, a slice of life captured in a particular way or in your words, but it's not the phenomena. The phenomena is much more complex in situ. And so the question of how you show the angle, how you show the bit of life, how you begin to do that is why we do a lot of the visual representation. We focus in and focus out. We bring the layers of decision-making into a visual table or the chart. And we call those anchors from the timeline swing outs. Okay, so we swing out this moment to be able to take a deeper look at what's happening in that moment. Does that help?
Yes. Sorry, I was switching between devices and I meet myself in the wrong way. But I mean, thanks. I think it's always, as a student myself, is still in the process of finding and in the process of trying to see ways of doing research. So I think that kind of logic of inquiry and the ways you navigating yourself across disciplines is probably takes time for me to think about. Thank you, but it helps a lot.
There is a question on here. It says, thank you for your insightful presentation, Professor Green. I was just wondering if the concept of best practices, for example, in investigating classroom interaction and particularly focused on teachers' acts and behaviors, actually makes any sense from an IE. First of all, let me give you a little bit of history. My first year of teaching, my undergraduate work was at Berkeley, and there are no answers. And I was taught how to design curriculum, not how to deliver curriculum. So the concept of best practice is not something that guided my teaching. But when I became a teacher in inner city Los Angeles with African American school students, I had exchange with Black churches. So I understood some of the cultural processes, and we had different ways of communicating. Then I became a reading specialist in a Hispanic school with bilingual students. And we diagnosed every child on 4 different measures. And we also worked with the teachers in the class, and we did pull-in programs just like the teacher I reported on. But that led me, when they came in with standardized assessments and the concept of best practices, to go back to graduate school. Because they took away my right as a teacher to diagnose the children, they made the tests and the standards the driving force. And that driving force took away the opportunities we had to individualize with students, bring them into a meta discourse about things. And the idea of best practices assumes generalizability from one school to the next, from one class to the next, because they don't do it in a situated way. If you look at the organizations that do best practices, they're generalizable across. Well, the Carnegie Foundation and Tony Brike's work has shown that in every school, there are decisions made and the same practice looks different. And you have to trace that practice and how it's taken up. So what is a best practice? You could say the way we think about it ethnographically is I can identify the processes and practice in one space and say, okay, Fred Erickson argues, in the specific, you can see the generic, not the generalizable. But each time I go into a new space or a new day, I have to ask, is this the same or it's different? What's making it different? So there is no static best practice that I can do. And having moved it to 4 different cities in 3 different states to teach, I know there's not even in the United States one set of interpretations of standards. So how do we understand best practice? When my cousin came from France to stay with me because he was in a computer science program and they wanted him to learn English, we had an English program his university sent him to. He had to learn the cultural processes. As we said, I showed in there, the words don't mean the same thing. The words are contextually bound. Language is a contextual perspective that potentially makes. I know that Neil Mercer from in England has done this work that shows in secondary schools, 85% of what's said in the class becomes common knowledge. That leaves 15% that isn't. Graham Nuttall from New Zealand mic'd children as they walked down to the library from their classroom. And in his work, which was on student learning, he heard the students reconstructing the whole process that they had just observed to themselves through these microphones, right? He and Adrian Alton Lee have a whole program, and it's in the Harvard Ed Review if you want to go look at their work. But he did a book called The Hidden Lives of Learners. It's from the New Zealand Educational Research Association. And he shows how the teachers taking our research or different paradigms, it didn't help them in their classroom. So what do we mean by best practice? How are we defining the concept? And then how are we initiating it or helping understand? We got rid of the Best Practice Institute here, or the center, because they don't hold across spaces. And I think COVID is showing this. The best practice is an interpretive practice. Do you want to be vaccinated? Do you not want to be vaccinated? How are you interpreting the information? So if we look at everyday life, we're getting a very visual picture that best practices, even from our World Health Organization or our national institutes, are not being interpreted as best practices by everybody. So how do we understand that is why we're taking up the ethnographic, seeking to trace it, seeking to look at how people engage with it, interpret it, and work with it. Does that help?
Thank you, Judith. We have a couple of hands up and some points. Can I ask with Martina Fernandez and then move into Sarah Nizami Nav. Hi, Martina.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for like to start. I'd like to thank you for this space and this presentation. It was amazing just to be able to take part in it. So thank you for that. But I have a question that is, I'm a graduate student, and I think that one of the biggest challenges that at least we as students face, and I think that this might be something that might resonate here and there, is where like I find really valuable that idea of thinking and analyzing elements, not in isolation, but in the relationship with other elements in the context. I think that that is really rich when it comes to analyzing your data from an ethnographic perspective. But I think that one of the biggest challenges is where to stop, right? Like where to stop that chain of relationships, right? Because, you know, eventually you have a page limit that you need to, you know, kind of work with. So I think that that is one of, at least for me, the biggest challenges. And I would like to hear from you if there's any strategy or just, I don't know, like a guideline on where to stop, you know, with this relationship of different elements.
Absolutely. Why we do that chart that has the questions evolving is the question of where to stop. So if I have this big question, and that big question is one that's driven me for 6 decades, okay? So every time I go into a class, I have to break it into smaller questions to see the elements. But the first thing is analyze one space that you have where the element is something you want to go in depth into. Then you take and say, oh, wait a minute, it's connected to something else. And in my dissertations, I've had more than 70 dissertations done by students over the years. The next thing they do is do a new chapter in their dissertation. So there's nothing about a 5-chapter dissertation. So every analysis is a separate chapter. And it says, oh, this raised these questions for me. I can explain this much through this analysis, but now it raised a new question. So now I have to collect from my archive or go add additional things to my archive or talk to the people in the situation to get more insight and frame a new question that is connected, okay? And it allows me then to put together a data set. See, we don't think of video or records. If you notice, I haven't used data. They are not data. They're only potential data. You have records you made in situ. You have records you collected from newspapers or any, you know, published work or wherever. Those records become data as I can figure a data set. Then what can I say through that analysis? Okay, so those 2 questions are my dissertation. And the reason I know this is at Berkeley, when I was a doctoral student, I was encouraged to do volunteer work on 3 different faculty members' projects so I could see the logic. Okay, and therefore I knew how they put it together. And so that helped me. But there are 3 pieces when you get to your final chapter that I don't see done that I was taught to do. One is, okay, so one is, what does your study show that supports other people's work? Second thing was, what do your studies show that challenges other people's work? And then my friend James Heath told me, what's news here? What do we not know that you have made visible? So when you're trying to do that, you can look at what you've confirmed from the past work. Now, Margaret Mead in her book, Blackberry Winter, it's an autobiography, said anthropologists, after they leave the field, go back to the literature to see these things, okay? those become explanatory theories. So what you're trying to do is distinguish between the orienting theories that guide you in the process and the explanations you can create from that. There is a new handbook that just came out in the from Routledge. I'll show you. It's okay. Let me see. Okay. So this handbook is rethinking a lot of the theory about learning in different contexts from different theoretical perspectives. We did one in there where my friend Cindy Brock, who does positioning theory and with Mary McVie, brought a friend from Australia to rethink an analysis of her dissertation. Her dissertation was done in 1989. But through positioning theory, she was able to trace one student across all the different cycles through her what she'd collected and show how he was very sophisticated in reading at age 6. But the school had said he was a special needs student and they pulled him out for reading instruction, making him to miss all the afternoon work or the things. So how do you know? You don't know with an ethnography what's going to become relevant or significant in this situation. And so each piece is a link. But as soon as I find something that's confirms or challenges, I'm finished for that one document. But we've been going back, and I'm now doing a book. It's going to go to press in December on interactional ethnography. And one of the ones we've done is we've looked over 3 decades in this advanced placement class to show that when the ethnographer reached a problem and didn't know something, how he learned, how that led to new analysis. So you're looking at your chain of logic. So I recommend as you're doing your research, you keep your own logic. Bill Corsaro said there are 4 kinds of field notes you take. One is the running record. We do that by time. We put time markers in so you can reconstruct the events, right? And I don't do it. I tried to do it with the word said. My doctoral students tend to write it more in present continuous verbs, the actions being taken. So how you record at that level influences it. The second piece is you have personal notes. And those I don't ever share with the teacher because they're usually things like, oh my God, she didn't say that. Or, what happened? Those I keep on a separate card. The third kind is methodological notes. Where were you standing? How were you collecting the information? Who could you see? What you were recording? Because everything's partial, okay? Not the whole environment. And one of my friends, Rebecca Cantor, who I worked with at Ohio State, she ran a preschool program for Ohio State. She thought if she put 4 cameras up on the ceiling, she would capture the whole. Well, we learned very quickly, no. And even if you have a 360-degree camera, as it moves, you're capturing only pieces of the whole, okay? And then, so you have personal notes, methodological notes, you have the field notes themselves, and then you have theoretical notes. As you make links between what is happening in the moment, this is like what Vygotsky was talking about. Oh, this is Günter Kress. This is his argument. You can make that note exactly where it happened. So what I do when I take this, I have notebooks, right, that are spiral. So I can open it and I put the running records on the right side, the field notes, and on the left, exactly where things came into mind in the moment. I put it down. That's the ethnographic way of recording. It triggers your mind. It isn't just copying down everything they said or video. Same thing happens with a video. When you're transcribing, we put columns. Oh, yeah, I can show you. Let me show you. We do this, by the way, when we read other people's literature. So we read the literature ethnographically. This is how I analyze records. It keeps going. Every column allows me to look at something else. So I have here the name of the study or the process. Here I have a description of who's in the process. Here I have a description of the theories in a reading, in what people are writing about that they're using, and each one and what they find goes in a different column. My mother came to help me move from graduate school, and she spent 2 weeks taking all this information and putting it on little cards that we could sort later into different categories. So how you do your analysis, how you do your work is a constructed and creative process that you have to reconstruct. And right now in the American Educational Research Association, if you go to their website, you will see standards for reporting on empirical social science research and another set of standards for humanities oriented. I was on the panel. It took us 2 years for 10 people who represented the different bases of qualitative, of ethnographic, of statistical, of measurement, to agree on the standards. There are 9 categories, and we wanted transparency because each of us was asked to nominate an article we thought was well written. There was only one of the 10 that we could follow the whole logic. So when you're reading literature, if you read the article and not a whole set of articles, you're getting a particular point of view. But I know from my history, why I wanted to have the discussion with multimodal people was I can read about it, but I can't do it yet, except that I do it from the very beginnings in green and white in the white book I showed, which was done in 1981, where we brought in psychologists and anthropologists and linguists and others together to look at ethnography and language. Okay? I can't follow one train of thought. I need a cultural guide, ways of thinking that enable me then to see how it integrates. Does that make sense to you? So that now that I'm technically retired, I actually like playing with people in different countries and talking about this so I can understand more deeply what people need to know, understand, and in order to do the thinking. And
Thank you, Judith. You know, it's kind of interesting, great invitation for us to go into the ways of thinking, our ways of seeing, and those of us in the multimodal community may kind of recall Good de Cress's understanding of multimodality as a framework, as a way of seeing. And now you have very nicely foregrounded this need to look into a number of epistemologies and also acknowledge their interdependence as we're trying to look at the text and weave the multimodal text that's in front of us, but also start weaving another multimodal text, which is our interpretation, understanding it's a social construction of reality, the social construction, interpretation is a social construction. But before we end, I would like to have a brief comment by Sarah and a brief response for you, being aware that we're over time. We don't want to keep people. If somebody has to go, I understand, don't worry. But Sarah and Nezminav, would you kindly just give us your comment and question so that Judith can briefly respond?
Hi everyone. Hi, Dr. Green. Thank you so much for this perfect lecture. So basically my question is, I really don't work on multimodal interaction in classroom setting. My dissertation is on a genre that is multimodal and is in online space, but I still can see how all the theoretical stuff, they translate into my own work. Yeah. So I still see myself, doing some ethnographical work, just because when I analyze the genre, I do interviews with producers of the genre and to understand, how, in the specific context. Yeah. what the rationale was, in producing their thoughts. But then I have this new research coming up where I have to actually look into the recontextualization process and basically resemiotization process of students turning their, because I work with video abstract genre, want to look into turning their written abstracts into video abstracts. And then I'm just a little, because there are a lot of things to look at, it's such an overwhelming sometimes, process. I just wanted to seek some guidance from you on how to structure this sort of study, what are some stuff to look at or might be interesting. Although I know some of my, the things that I'm gonna focus on, but still I don't want to really miss out on the very important things.
First of all, you're going to miss out on things anyway.
Yeah.
So what you have to do is articulate clearly how you're beginning to do it. What we're finding in writing this book on interactional ethnography, the hows are the what. It's not what's happening, it's how is what happening. So how are you framing it? So you need to step back and decide, okay, if I were telling somebody how to do what I'm doing, how would I tell them what to look at, when to look at it, when to analyze it, and what to do if you're reconstructing your approach, your process of thinking and researching? Okay. Stepping back is hard. I know I'm engaged with a group called Drama Dogs here. I'm watching how they create performance, how they create from the very first moments of choosing what to read to then having readings to then the actors and different things. So I'm sitting in on the backstory. Okay, so I understand this is a challenge, and I'm learning that my language doesn't fit his language or his goals. So when you're dealing with each of these, how are you bringing forward not just who the person is, but what their goals are, what their thinking is. And what I get from Ken all the time is he has a different way. He does embodied theater. He doesn't do technique. And as a director, he's looking at particular ways of engaging the person to movement, to body, to other things, not just staging it. And those are things I'm learning of what's not being done as well as what is being done. So if you think about set inclusion, set exclusion in mathematics, the circles,
right?
You have a blue circle, you have a yellow circle. Start to intersect them, and then you'll see what's in the middle. I've had to do that with the theories guiding my own thinking from the ages. But the key for what you're talking about, and I'd have to have you talk more about it because I got a surface levels. Okay, Sarah?
Right.
But
Yeah.
I need to have a little bit more understanding. What happened I have a dissertation that was done in Israel with a family community online that's digital, and how they created digital spaces and some face-to-face as the parents brought children into Israel who didn't speak Hebrew and so how they built a community. So this whole dissertation is looking through a digital ethnography frame.
Right.
So that might be something relevant to some of the thinking. I wasn't her advisor. Her advisor was into language policies. And so how within language policy, this kind of work can make visible who did what, how did they do it? How was this supported? What were the constraints? Where were things going?
Right.
Does that relate to the kind of questions you're asking me?
Yes, I think so. It's just the very beginning of my research. I still have to structure it. I thought I would just use, I really don't want, I want to do it through background also sort of
Yeah, but
research.
that's called the pre-field work phase in anthropology.
Right.
It is the formal phase of how you're coming to know and how you're beginning to identify. So that phase of your work is part of the major part of your process.
Right. Okay.
There's a new book that just came out called Becoming Ethnographers. It's edited by people in Barcelona
Right.
that do community-based ethnographies. It's Juana Sancho Gil and Fernando Hernandez. It's just been published.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
takes people looking at how they became. And so it will take you through that, but they're personalized stories of becoming ethnographers.
I think my main
Thank you.
concern is, sorry, I don't want to take too much of time,
Actually,
but
what I could suggest, Sarah, if we just kind of close the session and maybe you can stay on for a few more minutes so I can just
thank you. Yes.
don't hold everybody because I understand that people may need to leave.
And I'm perfectly willing, if you want to continue the dialogue, we can set up a Zoom time. And you can
Okay.
make it more articulate to me so that I understand your context a little bit more
Right.
as to what you're trying to do. I'm happy to do that with Zoom or, through digital.
Right.
Me-
Okay, that would be
And also,
awesome. Yes.
yeah.
Maybe
also
I can
that-
email
that's-
you later. Yes.
That's
thank
my
you.
goal.
Exactly, yes. And at the start of the chat, you can see the links to Professor Green's resources. So you can always contact Professor Green through this route. But coming to the end of this multimodality talks, which is collaboration between the University of Leeds, University of Stockholm University, and UCL, we'd like to thank Judith ever so much for joining us. It's one of these rare opportunities to break our silos and just come together. And we'd like this to be a beginning of a collaboration and a talk. And Judith has been very, very generous with her time and offered the possibility of talking, creating, cross-continental groups, inviting each other. So you can use this platform as a way of communicating with us and with Judith as well. Joey, you have information about the talk we have in 2 weeks' time at Multimodality Talks.
Yes, I have put it in the chat, the links
Fantastic.
about the details and the ways to register.
Fantastic. So see you in a couple of weeks with the presentation the 26th of November. And until then, goodbye. We'll end the recording. And if anyone wants to just hang around briefly and say hi, that's absolutely